So I'm very, very happy to present today Gerrard Fisher, who's one of the business school's entrepreneurs in residence, who's going to be our speaker for today. So Gerrard is a leader in circular business model creation. This is the first time I've come across this term and it looks really interesting. He runs 3 businesses, including one certified B Corporation, which hopefully he'll talk a little bit about, because that's also very exciting for the business school, given that we have this kind of very strong allegiance to ethical business practices. And he advises clients on how to change from make, sell, use, dispose to circular options that extend product life, maximise value, improve profit, and reduce resource consumption. So this sounds very exciting. I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Sarah Hannam. I'm the Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences. And I'm also super happy to say we've got Nick Wilton with us today, who's the Dean of Oxford Brookes Business School, and a couple of other members of staff as well along for the ride. So over to you, Gerrard.
So the title of this session is called How to Make More Money by Selling Less Stuff. It's intentionally confrontational because, first of all, it doesn't make sense in conventional business thinking. You think sales volumes, profit, more margin, more profit. But actually, there is another way. And it's really important that we adopt the other ways, partly to do with climate change. You can see there at the top the sort of the climate stripes and the global heating that we're all experiencing at the moment. So I'll put that into context as well as we go along the way. A little bit about my main business at the moment is QSA Partners. It's a small consultancy, boutique consultancy, I guess you'd call it, and that is what we do. So we are focused on helping businesses work out different ways to conduct their business models. I'll talk a bit about the process as we go through, and I'll talk about some examples. It sounds a bit glib, but really at the core of it, it's about improving customer loyalty through better service. And by doing that, you tend to reduce a lot of the marketing costs you might normally expect, and you capture more of the value of the products that you're dealing with in your market. So as you work your way through this, you'll see there's some quite clever ways to make an awful lot more money out of stuff than simply just selling it once. Got a couple of chat comments already, so.
It's just people introducing themselves rather than asking questions. So I'll carry on doing that in the background, okay?
Perfect. So we are a certified B Corp. I'm delighted to say that we have just recertified as a B Corporation. We originally certified 3 years ago with a just past the post score of 81.2. Delightfully, this last couple of weeks, actually, we've been recertified with a score of 105.9. So that is a 30% increase in our score, which we're delighted with, and puts us firmly in the echelons of good B corporations, I'd like to think. From our experience being a B corporation, we originally came into it with a limited understanding of what it involved or what it really meant, but aware that we operate under what's called a business impact model. So our impacts, although we're a tiny company, are driven through the climate impacts that our customers deliver as a result of their business model change. But once we had certified, we obviously realised there's a lot more to it in terms of continuous improvement in your business, in your governance. And so this was a way for us to generally improve the performance and management of our business. So, you know, we're great fans of this, and I appreciate there's lots of different certifications and standards and criteria that businesses can apply, but B Corp has worked well for us as a general improvement in all of our business practices. So if you're not already involved in that, I recommend you find out some more, whether that's for your own business or just to see what's going on in the community, because there are growing, vibrant communities. Certainly one in Oxford, and I'm based in Northamptonshire. There's one growing there now as well. So it's certainly a growing area to get involved in. And the other point of view from resulting from our B Corp certification, one of the things you do is start to get customer feedback. And as a result of that, now we're listed in the UK's leading management consultancy report, which we're quite pleased with, simply because there's some big names in there with lots of people. QSA Partners is for individuals. And one of the main messages, I think, of this presentation is the amount of impact that you can have, regardless of the size of organisation you work in. We're delivering some major change in massive global markets, and you know, the world is your oyster, I think, in terms of having some sustainable impact on society. So let's move on to circular business models, and we'll start with why do we need to use circular business models? Well, fundamentally, we must, as a society, radically reduce the consumption of products and materials that we create from new every year. And I'll just give you some information on that. Making the products that we use is actually causing half of our climate emissions, very roughly. This is a piece of work done a few years ago now by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is an organisation dedicated to circular economy development, led by Ellen MacArthur, who sailed around the world, you might remember, if you've been around a little while like me. This analysis was only looking at a certain proportion of core materials in the industry. So it didn't include sort of specifically textiles or clothing, electronic products. It looked at major things like food and steel and cement. But even just in those segments, worked out that around 45% of climate emissions are caused by making those things. The other half is powering our homes and cities and fueling our vehicles. But effectively, if we can reduce the number of new things we make, we can radically and quickly reduce the carbon emissions associated with making those products. So it's actually a way of delivering a really quick climate win. You see a lot of climate change, investment in renewable energy takes many years, a long time to have impact. We could effectively switch consumption off overnight if we decided to change, and we would radically reduce our carbon demand on the planet. And as part of that, something that does get talked about a lot is recycling. Circular economy, people tend to leap to recycling and thinking as long as we're getting the materials back, then we're circular and everything's fine. But it's important to understand that recycling is not the whole answer. It is certainly essential for the purposes of pollution control and capturing materials that we have made that really shouldn't be released into the environment. So think of plastics and things like that. Perfect to capture those and recycle them. But from a greenhouse gas benefits point of view, it's not very efficient. So there's some examples here of common household products, clothing, TVs, office chairs, and the greenhouse gas benefits that the UK could accrue by recycling those products more effectively. But if we move on to looking at reuse, oh, sorry, that's gone the wrong way. That's interesting. If we move on to looking at reuse, we have to change the scale of the graph because the impacts of reuse are substantially greater. If we were to reuse these products effectively, we'd be sort of 10 times the carbon saving. And so the real trick is to make sure that we are extending the lifetime of products as much as we can, utilising them as heavily as we possibly can. And that involves even sharing them with each other, and then making sure that we do get them back at their end of life. So it's reducing consumption and really, really sweating the assets that we're already making that is going to have the biggest impact on our climate. And to give you a feel of scale, I'm not sure, can't see how many people are on the call now, but you can put your hand up if you know Windermere in the Lake District. I was lucky enough to grow up near Windermere, so I know it quite well. It's England's largest lake. It's about 10 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. And as a young child, I used to wonder how much water there was in Windermere. Well, it turns out it's 310 million cubic meters, which is quite a lot of water. It's not very deep, but it's still quite a lot of water. If you think about the water footprint of all the textile and clothing products that we use in the UK every year, put on the market new, it's actually something like 5 billion cubic meters of water impact required to grow the fibres and manufacture them, dye them, wash them, prepare them for fabrication, and then get that product to our market. So thinking of it in context of Windermere, it's actually 16 Windermeres every year is required to grow and make the clothing and textiles that we use in the UK every year. So that's just to give you a feel of the scale. But if you ever go and get to see Windermere, it's a big lake, and it gives you a bit of context for how much stuff we're getting through. So that's water footprint. Obviously, there's carbon footprint, and there is data available. One of the common sources is WRAP, the Waste and Resources Action Programme. It has a voluntary agreement called Textiles 2030 that it's running to try and help tackle the water, carbon and waste impacts of textiles put on the UK market every year. And I'll come back to textiles because it's quite a core market for us at QSA too. Another way of looking at the issue, so McKinsey with the Global Fashion Agenda looked at the sort of global climate picture of the fashion sector and effectively said, the fashion sector really needs to radically tackle its carbon footprint, and it set out a trajectory to halving its carbon footprint by 2030. And if it does that, then it's on the right trajectory to achieve net zero by 2050. So 2030 is only a few years away, and halving that carbon impact is quite a steep goal. I think, this again is a couple of years old now, this research. And if we consider where we are, well, they talk about a 1.5 degree pathway. Arguably, we're already experiencing 1.5 degrees now. So the clock is ticking. And also the sales trajectory of this market is absolutely nowhere near where it needs to be to reduce those emissions. So I really don't think that increasing consumption and reducing climate impacts is wholly compatible. So the whole industry really does need to think carefully about how it tackles consumption of new product and materials. So for me, how to make more money by selling less stuff really is a burning issue. It's not just a nice to have, it's not a developmental opportunity for businesses. It is fundamentally important to the way that they continue to do business. Conventional thinking, in my opinion, is that the market is continually growing, and therefore if we hold our market share, we will get more money and everyone will be happy, especially our shareholders. I think the converse is true. The market is going to shrink. We are going to have resource pinch points. And so actually it becomes even more critical for your business, because retaining your market share is not enough. You need to grow it, you need to compete, and you need to put your competition under. It's a bit of a harsh message, but that is why people need to adopt circular business models very quickly. So let's talk about what circular business models are. What do they look like? And if it's more than just recycling, then what exactly happens to things? There's different ways of thinking about this. So one approach is to talk of product stewardship. And back from my history in the chemical sector, that was something that the Chemical Industries Association used to encourage. So if a drum of our product turned up on a dockside in Nigeria, we would go and collect it to make sure that it didn't end up being released to the environment. That is proper product stewardship, looking after your products right through to their end fate. Another approach is actually what the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's thinking and language is based on. They call it circular economy, but originally it was generated by a chap in Switzerland called Walter Stahl, who talked about the performance economy. And really the focus was there, as much as anything, you want the performance of the thing. You don't necessarily want to own the thing itself. If you have the outcome, that's what's more important. And so how you might foster that outcome rather than need to own the product. But anyway, we'll talk about a few examples in simple terms. And really it's three simple categories. So first of all, can you make things that last longer? Better durability. Secondly, can you reuse those items and use them as heavily as possible? So it's fine having a wardrobe full of clothes, but how often are you actually using all of those garments that are in there? And then finally, when that product has reached the end of its life, do you have a proper system for capturing the materials that are in it and recovering them and redeploying them as effectively as you can when they are no longer usable? And so there's a long way towards that in terms of repair, remanufacturing, and refurbishment before you even get to recycling. Now, from a conventional business point of view, these are quite challenging because all of these things involve investing more in the manufacture of your product. But actually what I'm about to show you is cases where businesses have worked out how to justify that, and you turn the system on its head, you create the business case based on circularity, and then you can see exactly why investing 10% more in material strength, for example, would give you a longer business model and greater return from your customers. So, we've sat in the room with some big brands sort of complaining, I want to make a more expensive product, I just can't justify it. This is the way to achieve that. And we're very clear that this is based on business, finance, sense, and commercial performance. It's not based on starting with an eco objective and then trying to justify that later. So the kind of business model options you'll actually see in the market range from, simply trying to make something that's more durable. You can see examples, in clothing, in electricals, brands like Miele and Bosch would talk about making a longer life, longer guaranteed product, and they achieve a certain amount of market value from that. But we're seeing more and more now, there's peer-to-peer trading happening in various markets. eBay is just one of them. There's buyback and resale being done by brands directly with customers, and we're seeing more trading platforms like Backmarket grow up on those sort of business models. And then we see this sort of peer-to-peer sharing and hiring space. It's not always successful. We've seen it in automotive, for example, but there are platforms where you can share your assets or rent them out to each other. And there's a lot of that going on in fashion as well at the moment. And as a business, then you might own that process. You might do the hiring and leasing directly. And then if you get that far, you're really thinking differently about the way you run your business. You're not talking about sales volume and margin. You're thinking about asset life, asset utilization, the time and cost to turn that asset back around and get it back on the market as quickly as possible, and understanding your repair infrastructure as well. And then ultimately, if you get it really right, you end up in a service model. And there's many examples of this. I'll talk about one of ours in a moment, but there are some really weird and wacky ones out there. So for example, in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, they don't pay for the lights in the ceiling, they buy the light that they get from it. They pay for the amount of lux that comes out of the lighting system. And Philips is the company that owns the lights in the airport and pays for the electricity to run them and maintains them. And so then Philips' objectives are directly aligned with its customers. What's important is how much light is delivered to the areas in the airport, because that's what the customer wants. And by doing that, you realign Philips' objectives to make those products ultra reliable, ultra efficient, and very low maintenance. And so you change the way that what you might have thought was a conventional business model of just selling as many lights as you can, you switch it around into trying to align the incentives of the supplier with the customer. The important thing is that the further to the left-hand side of this diagram that you can go with your business model, effectively, the more you lock your customer in, the more loyalty you garner from them, and the more regular income you get without having to market to new customers. So, we challenge this convention of thinking in social media, business modeling, it's all about the funnel, make the funnel huge and you'll get enough conversion rates. Well, that's one approach, but if you had a really thin funnel and you didn't need to keep filling it up, that's a lot of guaranteed business coming your way. And so actually your business growth objectives change quite substantially. And this is a completely different way of rewiring your business. So what does change look like? I'll give you some examples. There's a bit of a range here, but it's just to give you a flavour of it. It's not limited to one industry. We believe these models can be implemented anywhere, pretty much. We've done it in clothing, in electricals, in automotive. We've even done it in human waste. And if we can find value in that, I promise you we can find value in the business that you're running at the moment. And you might have heard talk of a waste hierarchy. I've boiled it down to something a bit simpler for today's purposes, but basically we want to move our clients away from selling stuff and convert them to this service ideal. That's where we really want to get them to. If we can't get that far, then we'll get as far as selling it, but making the most of it in some way. And then ultimately below that is being able to recycle it, but we don't tend to worry about that too much. If clients are just looking at that, we don't really think they're up for business model change. Bottom of the pile is throwing it away. That's absolutely what we are trying to avoid. So one of our favorite clients, we did some work with a tire company called Bamvolk. And before we started the project with them, their sales volume, well, I can't tell the actual number, but it was very high. After our project, we had reduced their sales volume of product to 0. And they were delighted with that. They made a lot more money. And they were so successful, they actually managed to sell their company to Continental tires. And the way that we did it is looking at the service requirements of their customers. So Bamvolk was selling retread tires to truck fleets operated by supermarkets. And they were in this position where making tires was becoming more expensive. Cheaper tires were coming onto the market from overseas markets. And they were in this pinch point of how they differentiated their product. But when you step back and look at what your customers' needs are and the customer proposition, if you're running a truck every year, the cost of the tires for that truck are roughly £3,000, so relatively small. The cost of the driver at the time of doing this work was around about £40,000 a year. So every day that driver's not working because the tires are broken, you're wasting money. But the cost of the fuel for running that truck every year is another £60,000. And so very quickly you can say, well, I can justify spending another £1,000 on tires if I can save £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 on those other costs by making sure the truck is running all the time. And by aligning with your customers' needs in that way, you totally re-engineer your thinking. So we worked with Bamvolk. There was some experimentation involved, but effectively switched them from selling these retread tires to selling a service. So their customers started paying them per mile of tire use and not buying tires at all. And actually the tires achieved the fuel savings and reduced carbon emissions as a result of that, but also increase the uptime of the trucks. So the customer gets more utilization out of it as well. There is an element of luck to some of these things. At the time that this change came in, there was some change going on in the sector as well. But as a result of that, Bandvolk managed to secure roughly 2/3 of the UK supermarket truck fleet as customers as a result of offering this service. And partly that's because they convert what might be a capital spend on items to a consumable spend. That works sometimes for customers. But more importantly, they have a service now where they can get out to a truck, I think, within 57 minutes. They have a 24/7, 365 service. So they've moved from being just a manufacturer of stuff that sells out and once it goes on the truck, it's gone, to now aligning completely with what the customer's needs are and making sure that their trucks are always operational with tyres that work. And they're now interested in the condition of those tyres, how used they are, how durable they are. And so it ultimately ends up in a happier customer. And why would you switch back to buying tyres if this company keeps your trucks running all the time? You hardwire yourself into their business. Similar example again was a company we worked with called Mujo Fitness. So they make, this isn't torture equipment, this is recovery equipment for rotator cuff injuries. If you do a lot of manual handling, the rotator cuffs in your shoulder can get damaged. Elite athletes suffer from that kind of injury as well. They developed some clever technology that helps people recover and monitors their improvement, which is quite unique. Normally with physio treatment, you get given a course of physio, you don't do it, you don't get better, and then you don't go back to work very quickly. This actually is a structured program of training that can be monitored, and then we all know how well you're improving and when it is safe for you to return to work. Again, Mujo was faced with the options of trying to make these items in bulk, probably overseas, or trying to servitize the products. And so we helped them develop a sort of pay-as-you-go booking system. But now effectively what they do is they operate a smaller fleet of these units on trucks that go around the country, and physiotherapists and occupational therapists can book time on these systems. And it means they have a smaller managed fleets of assets and they can do upgrades in situ, and they're more inclined to make these products more durable than they would have originally done if they were trying to reduce manufacturing costs from an overseas supplier. Another client we worked with was Samsung. This was back before mobile phone leasing business models were really a major thing, but we did help them launch what is called their upgrade program. And the important thing is here, obviously, there is a portion of the market that will always want the latest technology product or the latest fashion product. It's not about working against their desires and trying to cut their consumption directly. It is about making sure you get their used products back and you utilize those really effectively in the rest of the market. So by providing easy access to new products for this top part of the supply chain, we can now get those products back and sell them and provide insurance cover replacements for other customers in the market through remanufacturing that actually Samsung is really, really keen to do. If you ever go to South Korea, the customer service there is second to none. It's shocking how bad we tend to be treated in this country for customer service, but their objectives for repair are phenomenal. You literally get shops where you go and get a repair done in situ, and those shops are run by Samsung and LG. They're not sort of smaller operators. They provide it as a core service. And on that vein, we also help them repair a door-to-door repair service. They have mobile vans going out and providing repairs to customers' mobile devices at their home or their place of work as well, extending the life and utilization of those products. We've worked with companies like Adidas. Not all of these trials have been successful, and this is one that did come to an end, unfortunately. So they tried doing a trade-in business model with their customers called Infinite Play. And this was, again, trying to get into the mindset of streetwear and people who might want streetwear for a short amount of time, but then want to sell it on. I think, to be honest, this kind of came along at a similar time to eBay growing, Vinted taking off, and so it was becoming quite a competitive marketplace at the time. But there is a certain advantage to the brand that sold you the garment, or the brand whose garment it is, offering you a take-back or buy-back service directly. Because you, as the brand, know exactly what you put in that product. And this is where Adidas is actually very strong. There's a QR code in every Adidas product, and they can tell you exactly what it was and exactly what its composition is, which most other traders on the market can't do. So as a source for resale product and as a source potentially for recycling into their future fiber raw material supply chain, this can be a very useful thing to run. They're still experimenting with buyback in different markets and with rental in other markets as well. So it's not that they've stopped completely, but this is just an example of one that's no longer available on the UK market. And back on that point about reselling products, there is a challenge about if people are buying secondhand things that are cheaper, there's something called the rebound effect. Will they then just spend the rest on a Ryanair fare going on a holiday somewhere? That is a concern, absolutely. And so we're leading some work on what's called displacement research. So if you were to work with a platform like Depop in this case, all those secondhand items that are being sold on that platform, are they genuinely preventing the buyer from going and buying another new thing? Or are they just discretionary, cheap, extra purchase? And this actually varies by platform, by brand, by product. And so this specific work was just for Depop, for their own clients. But actually we found on their platform pretty consistently across many markets, roughly 9 out of 10 products they sell were being used as a primary product and were delaying or preventing the person from going and buying a new garment elsewhere. So it is meeting the market need, and it can help to reduce consumption in total. Another piece of work we've just finishing off on this, and actually I've got a confession to make. I've started another business up, but that's what entrepreneurs do. This is looking at extended producer responsibility in the textiles and fashion sector. So it's a new area that's going to hit brands across all of Europe and the UK in the next few years, where producers will probably have to pay some kind of fee to pay for the future treatment of the products they're putting on the market. There are some pretty ugly ways of doing this. Past EPR systems on packaging, on electricals, on batteries have all been very complex and are quite old, whereas now we know that many businesses have good quality data in their own systems. So if we can harness that data, we can give them very rich information on which garments perhaps attract a larger fee and which garments shouldn't attract such a large fee because they're already made with circular principles in mind. So we've published a white paper on this from a new organisation we call WEFT, and this is getting really good support. We've got the backing of the major trade associations in the UK, British Retail Consortium, UK Fashion and Textiles, British Fashion Council, and we've had funding from Innovate UK to deliver this work, and it's really taking off. So that's our next big opportunity. Entrepreneurs always like an opportunity. So we'll move on just quickly to how we influence change. How on earth do we go through this process with our clients and convince them this is a better way to do business? What drives us as a B Corp is our impact and the reduction in consumption and the carbon impacts of that. But obviously we recognise what drives our client is their stakeholder performance reports and their profitability. So we align ourselves with that ourselves. It's a really simple process. This absolutely is not rocket science. Any business management person can do this. It's a classic innovation, test, repeat cycle. So we go through a range of innovation opportunities with them, understanding their particular market situation. It has to be said, a lot of the gaps that we see in the market is a lack of real understanding of who the customer is and exactly what they want. Which is probably quite shocking to talk about at a business school, because I think that's probably GCSE level business studies, let alone degree level. But it's quite shocking how few organisations genuinely get under the bonnet and understand what their customers want. Some of the brands I've talked about earlier are actually very good at it, which is why they ended up in a place where they could test and run trials. You go to a trial stage, and that is not to make an immediate profit. That is to confirm the assumptions you've made in your financial case assessment and understand where the operational sensitivities are. Once you've done that, you can create a full business case, and then you can scale to market. And we do see many businesses sort of jump through these processes a little bit too quickly. We have our own recipe, if you like, of how we guide people through this process. And it's potentially quite a complex map. You can make some assumptions or jump some steps and not realize the consequence of those decisions until later. So yeah, it can be complex, but follow simple business principles and you can do it. And the framework that we use to do it is something that we call the 7 C's of circular economy, just because these are a thing. But ultimately, at the center of it all is the customer. Exactly what do they want? Exactly how do they want to use it? And why is the proposition we're about to develop going to solve that problem for them in a better way than the current offer that they have on the market? In many cases, at the moment, it's simply because the customer's left with the product at the end of its life and they're struggling to get rid of it. They haven't got the right bin to put it in, or they don't know what it's worth. So actually, you can start by solving that problem. And then in that engagement process, you can learn more about how you might help them. From there, you literally jump to the commercial case. You need to be able to prove that this proposition can make a reasonable amount of money and understand the sensitivities around that commercial case. You need to make sure that what you're developing is coherent with your main business strategy. If you're trying to do this as an offshoot opportunity, forget it, because if it's not aligned with your core business strategy, it's not going to float. You might need to influence your core business strategy to achieve that, but that's worth doing. Back to my point about shrinking markets and how you increase your market share, your business needs to be taking that on board seriously. You need to get the commitment. These are typical change management things that you'll be aware of from your training. The commitment of your senior managers, the sponsors on the board who take part, the people who will liberate the budget necessary to deliver these kind of change projects. But you will also need to collaborate with external people. And a really important thing here is you're no longer dealing with suppliers and customers in the same way. You really are shifting to a partnership model. And it's about understanding the value across the whole chain and agreeing how you share that value equitably. So you can't be trying to hoover all the profit up for yourselves and leave your suppliers high and dry, because they'll go under and then you can't deliver your business model. So the refurbishment opportunities, the repair opportunities, you might need a third party to get the ball rolling for you. So you need to work out how you work with them. Change management is a whole topic on its own. I've put it in one bubble here, but I'm sure you can go to town on that and how you need to foster change in your organization. And then finally, the circularity. Come back to the point about how circular the opportunity really is. Is it reducing consumption, or actually have you just created a way of driving more consumption? We need to think about that carefully, but that's one of the checks that we do as we go through our process.
So Gerrard, we've got 3 questions. They're all quite meaty questions. So again, what I think we do is how much longer have you got on your presentation?
Couple more slides. Yeah.
So I say let's go through your presentation, then you can collapse it, and then we'll take the meaty questions because they're all good ones.
Okay. And to give you an example, just this year with the business school Waves team, we actually did some circular business models with a couple of students doing their summer consultancy project. Not to trivialize what they've done, but within a matter of weeks, students from the department went to DPS Designs, which is an engineering company that produces molds for aeronautical engineering and chocolate production, 2 very different markets. But effectively, Vicky and Della came up with a range of different options and the propositions that would satisfy those options and the profitability assessment of what would need to be considered to take those to market. As a result of that, Fancy Down, who's also an entrepreneur in residence at the business school, she's trialing a couple of those right now. So it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. You just need, a leader like Fancy, committed and willing to make things happen. And those options are there. They just need to be unearthed and tested out. So obviously we got to make a lot of chocolate along the way, which is great fun. But it's a really simple process, and I think this is a great opportunity for many more students at the business school, because the value is there. It's just a case of unlocking it and helping people understand how. So to summarize, effectively, we can all, as businesses, reduce consumption and the consumptive impacts of the products that we place on the market, or the products that we buy to deliver our services. And all of our decisions in that context do have a climate impact. So although people talk about personal carbon footprints, the carbon footprint of the business you work for is probably substantially bigger, and your ability to influence climate change is probably bigger as well. So we can have impact as businesses and individuals. And my invitation to you is to be ambitious and be that superhero. Think big, have courage, and advocate for action. And obviously eat some ice cream along the way. Thank you very much.
So our first question came from Nick. Nick, I wonder if you might want to ask it, because we're quite a small group.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Gerrard. That was fantastic, and it was great to end on a kind of one of the consultancy projects our students have done, because I think that's a great initiative, and it's great that they're having that sort of impact. But I'm really interested to know a little bit about your experience of going through B Corp
Yep.
Particularly, I guess, for the first time. And I think you demonstrated that obviously the purpose of it is continuous improvement, and you obviously demonstrate improvement. But was there a particularly challenging aspect for you as a small organization going through that? And I know there are a range of dimensions for the.
Yeah, I think to some extent, some things are easier than they might be for other businesses. So we're a limited liability partnership, and it's much easier for us to change our governing document, which is the partnership agreement, than it is to change articles of association for a limited company. So, we've got shareholders involved and everything. So some elements were easier. I think, as I say, we are a tiny company, so the resource requirements for doing the reporting and providing the audit trail to achieve certification was a challenge for us. But we felt it was both from a principal point of view and commercially for us as a reputational point of view, it was an important certification for us to achieve. And obviously the system is now changing. So I think if you register to become a B Corp now, there's a slightly different assessment method. We'll have to adapt to that when we next recertify in 3 years' time.
And I wonder, just for the benefits of our students on the call and others, just if you could quickly define what a B Corp is, that would be great.
Certainly. Sorry, it's a benefit corporation, and it comes from the United States. So in the United States, you are either a charity, so you can have a nice fluffy mission, or you are a commercial business, and under American law, you are obliged to satisfy the short-term profit needs of your shareholders. And so B Corp was developed as a kind of in-the-middle legal entity in the States as a way to target profit, but also target other objectives as well, without being in contravention of American law. And that's growing as a movement. So many companies now identify and certify as benefit corporations, so that they can state they have objectives beyond just generating profit.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so next up in terms of questions is Rebecca. Rebecca, I wonder if you might want to let us see you so you can ask your question in person, or I'm happy to ask it for you, whichever you prefer.
Met before. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, thank you so much. Thanks so much, Sarah and Gerrard. So my question I found, well, first of all, I found this talk really insightful. As you know, Gerrard, it's a familiar area with myself, but I learned a lot more in today's talk. So the two questions, well, is about EPR. I've never actually came across this. I think I have. I think before you spoke about this recycling scheme with the cat advertising on television, I think you spoke about that before.
Yeah.
So the first question was, considering EPR, is there a potential for cheaper made textiles, for these cheaper, maybe cost associated, sorry, let me say that again, maybe I've rewritten it wrong. Considering EPR, is there a potential for cheaper made textiles to have cheaper costs associated to them? Or will it be the other way around? So for instance, like plastics or these kind of water protective clothing that have these forever chemicals in them, will they be cheaper for companies to make, or will the lower cost be associated, say, linens or viscose or organic cottons?
So that really depends on the scoring system the government decides to implement when it does, and that's different for every country. So yes, to your point, in the Netherlands at the moment, they are charging based on the weight of product placed on the market, and that naturally disadvantages cotton goods because they tend to be heavier than polyester goods. So think about a normal shirt versus a football shirt. A football shirt is lighter and would attract a lower fee. So that could be considered an issue. But to counter that, there's then the question of what is actually the better outcome. And some mixed fiber products have longer durability. You probably know this, longer durability. And so our approach is to take a balanced scorecard and identify what factors we might want to consider, and then help industry and government work out how it might comparatively score these different factors. And it might pull different levers at different times to try and encourage more durable products or more recyclable products or products with more recycled content onto the market, as well as those with maybe more natural fibers, but they also have higher carbon impacts. So the idea is to give the menu of options rather than necessarily say one of those things is the right thing right now. But you're right, it does need to be considered carefully.
That's super helpful. And if you don't mind, I've got a kind of follow-up as well to that. I think that's a really interesting, I'd have to look into this a bit further as well. But considering these associated costs for these new materials being made, do you foresee then fashion companies maybe seeking alternative models? So for instance, like rental, these types of maybe sharing kind of services, so that maybe reduce those initial costs with the materials coming in?
Again, it depends what incentives are put in the market. So as part of that, back to that EPR thing we're talking about, we are actually presenting to the government that some of those funds that are collected should sponsor the operation of some of these reuse business models, because they directly deliver a carbon saving to the economy. But that's a long way down the road before that's actually implemented. But ultimately, yes, in terms of cost saving, and it's the bigger picture of cost saving, because it's not just the cost of producing the garment, it's the cost of getting that to the market, getting it to the right customer at the right time, getting the customer to that place through marketing and understanding how they've decided to buy that thing. There's a lot of hidden costs in that process that many businesses overlook. And if you're into that sort of more regular cycle of rental or resale, whatever it is, that customer's coming back to you automatically. And so many of those other costs no longer apply in the same way. So it is a way of reducing costs, and arguably businesses could move to a position of thinking about the profitability per kilo of resource they consume, or the profitability per kilo of carbon that is emitted on their behalf, to realize how inefficient or efficient they are being, because ultimately, 10 years time, shareholders will be looking at your business's carbon footprint. And if you can show you are 8 times more profitable than that other investment per kilo of carbon, you will be a more attractive investment.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Gerrard.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's great. So we've got another question from Darren now. Darren, do you want to ask yours?
Yeah, it's a really good talk. Thank you, Gerrard. Without naming and shaming companies, do you have a rough percentage split of how many companies pursue this model as a CSR tick box and fail versus those who are committed and succeed?
I don't have a split, I'm afraid. You're absolutely right. There's this issue of greenwashing or green claims, because people say they have some circular products and it turns out it's only 2% of their product portfolio. And it's a really challenging area, because they might genuinely be making those changes as an exploration and trying to show they're doing the right thing, but then falling foul of it, really not looking authentic. We know that, there are members of the public out there who genuinely want better products, more environmentally and socially friendly products. They just don't understand how to work out what is what and which ones they should or shouldn't be buying or renting or whatever. And businesses are trying to move towards that, but at the same time, they risk putting their head over the parapet and getting it shot off, quite frankly, when they take their first baby steps. So it's actually really hard to pick out which ones of them are authentic and which ones are not. We see a lot of companies coming out with circular business strategies, but how well they align with their core business strategy is a different question. I think the one I like most in the fashion sector is you see brands talking about wanting their customers to love them. And I think, if you think about any relationship, love is not a one-way gig. So what love are you showing to your customers, and how are you doing that through better customer service? If you think about the last time you had excellent customer service, that's the kind of vibe you want to be, promoting to your customers every single time they interact with your business.
Yeah, it's
Brilliant.
It's interesting, because we had a junior was there as well. We had an ethical marketing talk recently on campus, and used examples of big brands who claim to be, very sustainable, and used Nike as an example, and how they put out a campaign actually, but then actually the reason they did it was because they'd had really bad PR 3 months before around their not very ethical supply chain. So it's kind of, it was quite an interesting kind of expose of how big brands kind of pull the wool over people's eyes.
And this is the difference between, a genuine strategic intent and, frankly, what is a marketing and PR exercise. But yeah.
Gino, I think you've got a follow-up question, haven't you, on
Yes, exactly. So this really address this question when you address Rebecca's question, but again, if you'd like to add anything else. So exciting presentation, Gerrard. Thanks very much for sharing your expertise with us. So when it comes to moving from the traditional model to a circular one, so what are the big challenges companies may face? So the 7 C's cover some of of those points. But yeah, so mindset, internal collaboration, and so on. But anything else I'd like to add?
I think back to that point I said about Fancy, I think you do need a couple of real visionary people who are going to make this work. They might not be at a senior level, but they are your champions. You know, back to that kind of classic change management thing. Somebody who's really going to go for it. The most successful examples we've done are where somebody really leads this as a project and makes sure the stakeholders are aligned and senior teams are happy and that kind of thing. But I think, you know, a lot of it really does boil down to the nailing the customer segment you're aiming it at and the proposition that serves that segment. So if, say, for example, you're going for a trade-in and resale business model, it's not the same customer that's trading in and buying used from you. You know, one market of your customers have bought the product and are selling it back for some kind of benefit, but they might not want to buy reused. But the rest of your market does want to buy that reused product. So don't confuse the two and understand very clearly how those two differ, for example. The commercial case, you know, there's different ways of working that. You can almost make anything up if you're not careful, but making sure that's convincing and you have considered all of the operational costs in that model, you know, really good operational plan. And I think finally, probably it's about operationalizing it and understanding what supply partners are available and what their capabilities are, because you're probably looking to do things that your business is not designed to do currently. So you need to find somebody else who can do that repair or reuse operation and work with them. And so understanding what questions you ask of them can always be a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So we've got a little bit of space for further questions. We've got about 5 minutes left. Did anybody else want to make any contributions, ask any questions?
Can I just ask another question, Gerrard?
Yeah, sure.
I guess the question that arises for me, obviously you've got, if we take the fashion sector, because that's quite an immediate thing, and you've got two things in a sense kind of coexisting at the moment in terms of you've got the kind of fast fashion, retail, and on the other hand you've got the growth of things like vintage and so on. And if I think about my teenage daughters, they've got one fit in both camps, very much, much so. And I guess it's sort of, I suppose it. Do you think there will become a sort of tipping point, if you like, where actually these types of circular models and so on start to become the norm rather than the exception, in a sense, in that, is it going to be through regulation? Is it going to be through shifting consumer demand and the nature of markets? Is it going to be through things like kind of accreditation, kind of guiding businesses towards more sustainable models and those sorts of things? I mean, it's a big question, I guess, but
I think you need a mix of all those things. You know, the governments are there to put regulation in place, which is effectively the floor below which nobody should sink. You know, there are visionary businesses out there making a change. We've just completed some consumer research of our own, and we are definitely seeing a market shift amongst customers. And that's part of the problem, is actually when you talk to your customers, they're probably quite disenfranchised. They really want this, and you're not delivering it. And that's the genuine business strategic risk at the board level for me. 10 years ago, reusing clothes is a bit, you know, people didn't want to do it. Now, certainly younger generations, absolutely happy to do so. And not only are they buying reused and using rental, they are doing so regularly. So it's a habit, it's a behavior, it's welded into the market now. So as older generations leave the market, they will take over and it will be the incumbent model. I think the other thing is the unresearched and unrecognized impacts of what you're already doing. So we asked in our survey, we focused on high intensity shoppers, so people who buy more than the average number of clothing. And trust me, some people there are buying 40 garments a month. But we asked them in a survey, do you buy clothes, wear them and send them back with a label on for a full refund, thinking nobody had answered that question. 1 in 3 high intensity shoppers said, yes, I do. So they're using clothing brands as a library free of charge at the moment. And so again, the strategic gap is you're failing to monetize that service you're providing to your customer. You think of it as returns when actually you should be thinking of it in a totally different way. So, you know, businesses are already doing it. They just don't really realize.
It's really interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, does anybody have another quick question? We've got 2 minutes left, so we have got time for something very quick if anybody wants to ask anything.
Yeah, I have a quick
Rebecca.
question. Sorry.
Oh, okay, Junior and Rebecca. Okay,
Ladies first. Come on, ladies first.
Rebecca, go for it.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much, Junior. So my third question was, Gerrard, you picked up on how you're also looking into companies, you know, not doing these different types of activities, which actually then maybe encourage more overconsumption. Like sometimes rental, for instance, does. It can encourage that. So how do you check, I believe, in your company, how these companies that you're working with don't foster further consumption? What are those checks in place?
It's literally to do with the number of products needed to serve the market. And normally within a good circular business model, if that number's going up, your costs are going up. And so actually you've probably got the model wrong anyway. But there is a case, for example, you know, if we could spend all of our time renting garments and shipping them around and actually not using them very intently. But ultimately the utilization of that garment is what drives the profitability of the rental business model. So as long as we're clear about the metrics and we're clear that we're getting a utilization level that's commercially viable, we will probably be more circular. But we do check that, and we look at the total level of consumption and carbon impacts of that as well.
Okay, super.
Brilliant.
Thanks so much again.
Great question, Rebecca, and thank you very much, Gerald, from all of us for what was actually a really rich talk. I feel like I've learned a lot today about an area that I'm aware of, but it's how you've connected it all together and made us think about what role we can play in it as well. It's really, really helpful.